Senior year was supposed to be epic. Instead, I was starting over at a new school, in a new state, trying to convince myself that running away from my problems counted as solving them. You must be Olivia Bennett. The guidance counselor at Westbrook High, Mrs. Chen, peered at me over her glasses. Your transcripts from Riverside Prep are impressive. I managed a polite smile, trying not to flinch at the mention of my old school. 3 months hadn't been enough time to forget everything I'd left behind in Boston. Especially not him. Denver's quite a change, Mrs. Chen continued, printing out my schedule. Any particular reason for the move? Besides a spectacularly messy breakup that turned me into the school pariah. My dad got a job offer here, I said instead. It wasn't entirely a lie. Dad had been offered the position months ago. We just hadn't planned to take it until my ex-boyfriend, Nathan Hayes, made finishing senior year at Riverside impossible. Well, you're just in time for the start of the semester. She handed me my schedule. Your first class is AP Literature with Mr. Patterson. Room 204. Hannah Reynolds will show you around. She's one of our peer mentors. As if on cue, a girl with curly red hair and a constellation of freckles bounded into the office. She had the kind of energy that could probably power a small city. You must be Olivia. She grinned. Everyone calls me Hannah. Come on, I'll give you the grand tour. Though honestly, there's nothing grand about it except maybe the coffee stains in the teacher's lounge. As we walked through the halls, Hannah provided running commentary. Cafeteria food is actually decent on Taco Tuesdays. Avoid the third-floor bathroom, it's haunted. Or just has really bad plumbing. And whatever you do, don't eat there. She stopped abruptly as we reached room 204. Oh wow, you have Patterson first period. Lucky. He's got a new student teacher this semester who's supposedly super hot. All the girls are freaking out. I'm not really interested in, I started, but Hannah was already pushing open the door. Mr. Patterson. I come bearing your new student. The main teacher, a man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, looked up from his desk. Ah, Ms. Bennett. Welcome to. But I didn't hear the rest of his sentence. Because there, writing The Great Gatsby on the whiteboard in familiar handwriting, was Nathan's older brother, James Hayes. The same James who taught me to drive stick shift in his beat-up Jeep. Who'd helped me with my college essays over countless cups of coffee. Who'd been more of a friend than his brother ever was, right up until everything fell apart. He turned around, and I watched recognition flash across his face. For a moment, he looked as shocked as I felt. Then his expression smoothed into professional neutrality. Welcome to AP Literature, he said, as if we were strangers. As if he hadn't been the last person I texted before blocking his brother's number and leaving Boston behind. I slid into the nearest empty seat, my heart hammering. This wasn't happening. James was supposed to be at Boston University, finishing his teaching degree. He wasn't supposed to be here, in Denver, in my classroom, looking unfairly good in a button-down shirt and tie. Now, Mr. Patterson was saying, as Mr. Hayes was explaining, we're starting with The Great Gatsby. The universe, I decided, had a twisted sense of humor. I'd moved 2,000 miles to escape one Hayes brother, only to find myself face to face with the other. And not just any version of James but Mr. Hayes, student teacher, completely off-limits James. Hey, Hannah whispered from the seat next to me, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. More like I was living in one of Gatsby's elaborate parties, everything familiar and strange at once, the past and present colliding in the most inconvenient way possible. I'm fine, I whispered back. Just, remembering something. Like how James had looked at my graduation photos last spring and said, you're going to do amazing things, Liv. Like how he'd been the only one to call me Liv, and how it had always made my stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with his brother. Class, James, no, Mr. Hayes said, let's talk about unrequited love and the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. Unrequited love. Right. Because this situation wasn't ironic enough already. I opened my brand new copy of The Great Gatsby, trying to focus on anything except the way James's voice had gotten deeper, more confident. More teacher-like. Trying not to notice how he'd grown his hair out a little, or how his glasses made him look sophisticated instead of nerdy. Ms. Bennet? I looked up to find both teachers staring at me, along with 25 curious classmates. Would you like to share your thoughts on Gatsby's pursuit of Daisy? I met James's eyes for the first time since walking in. Sometimes, I said slowly, the worst thing isn't wanting something you can't have. It's wanting something you shouldn't. Something flickered in his expression: surprise. Understanding. But before he could respond, the bell rang, saving me from whatever might have come next. As I gathered my books, I heard Hannah sigh dreamily. See? Told you he was hot. This semester just got way more interesting. She had no idea. By lunch, I developed a detailed strategy to avoid any one-on-one interaction with James. What I hadn't counted on was his sister. Olivia? A familiar voice called out as I navigated the cafeteria. Oh my God, Olivia Bennet. I turned to find Grace Hayes, James and Nathan's little sister, waving frantically from a nearby table. She looked exactly as I remembered, just with purple highlights in her dark hair now. I can't believe it. She rushed over, pulling me into a hug. What are you doing in Denver? Did you know James is here? Have you seen him yet? He's going to flip. Each question felt like a tiny arrow. Before I could answer any of them, Hannah appeared at my side. You two know each other? Know each other? Grace laughed. Olivia practically lived at our house last year. She dated our brother Nathan, and she and James were like. Grace. James's voice cut through the cafeteria noise. He stood behind us, holding a coffee cup and looking decidedly uncomfortable. Can I borrow Olivia for a minute? To discuss her transfer credits. Grace's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but she shrugged. Sure. But you're sitting with us at lunch, right, Liv? The old nickname made me wince. Actually, She'd love to, Hannah answered for me, already pushing me toward Grace's table. I'll save you a seat. James cleared his throat. My classroom? It'll only take a minute. I followed him to room 204, hyper-aware of the whispers trailing behind us. Great. First day, and I was already fodder for the rumor mill. The classroom was empty, afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. James closed the door and turned to face me, running a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I remembered all too well. You cut your hair, he said finally. I touched my shoulder-length bob self-consciously. I'd cut it the day after leaving Boston, in some cliché attempt at a fresh start. Yeah, well, change is good, right? Liv. Don't. The nickname hurt more coming from him. You should probably call me Ms. Bennet now, Mr. Hayes. He flinched. This is weird, isn't it? Which part? Running into my ex's brother who's now my teacher? Or the fact that the last time we talked, you promised you'd always be there for me, then disappeared when I needed you most? The words came out sharper than I'd intended. James looked stricken. I tried to call you, he said quietly. After everything happened with Nathan. But you'd blocked everyone, changed your number. Can you blame me? After what he did? What he did? Liv, Nathan told me you. A knock at the door interrupted us. Mr. Patterson stuck his head in. James. Department meeting in 5. Right, thanks. James straightened his tie, teacher mode back on. We should talk about this. Properly. Nothing to talk about, I said, heading for the door. It's ancient history. Is it? Because you still have my sweatshirt. I froze. I did still have his old BU sweatshirt, buried at the bottom of my suitcase. I'd meant to mail it back but could never bring myself to do it. "Keep it," he called after me. "It always looked better on you anyway." The rest of the day passed in a blur. At lunch, Grace regaled Hannah with sanitized stories from the good old days, carefully avoiding any mention of why those days had ended. I pushed my food around my plate, trying not to notice how James kept glancing at our table from the teacher's lunch area. "So," Hannah cornered me after school, "when were you going to mention that you know our incredibly hot student teacher?" "I don't know him," I said automatically. "Not anymore." "Right. That's why he couldn't take his eyes off you all through lunch." "Hannah. And that's why Grace kept talking about all these mysterious inside jokes. And that's definitely why you looked like you were about to pass out in first period." I sighed, leaning against my locker. "It's complicated. I'm starting to get that." She studied me carefully. "Does this have anything to do with why you really left Boston?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Heard you're in Denver now. Running away again, Liv. N." My hand started shaking. "Nathan. How did he even know?" Another buzz. "James says you're in his class. Funny how things work out, isn't it? Olivia." Hannah touched my arm. "You okay? You look pale." "I have to go," I mumbled, already heading for the exit. But as I pushed through the doors, I collided with someone entering. Whoa! Strong hands steadied me. "James." Because of course it was James. "Sorry," I gasped, trying to pull away. "I didn't." "Liv." His voice was low, concerned. "What's wrong?" I showed him the texts. His expression darkened as he read them. "I'll talk to him," he said. "Make him stop. Like you did last time." The words tasted bitter. His grip on my arms tightened slightly. "I didn't know last time. Not everything. But Nathan told me what really happened at prom, and I don't." I finally succeeded in pulling away. "Just don't. You're my teacher now, remember? My past isn't your problem anymore." I fled to my car, ignoring him calling my name. As I drove home, Nathan's words echoed in my head, "Funny how things work out." Yeah. Hilarious. Almost as funny as falling for your boyfriend's brother, only to have him choose family loyalty over you when everything went wrong. Almost as funny as finding him again, 2,000 miles away, in the one place he was completely off limits. Shakespeare would have loved this. The thing about running away from your past is that it has an annoying habit of catching up with you, usually during AP literature presentations. "Ms. Bennett?" Mr. Patterson called out. "Your analysis of Daisy Buchanan is up next." I walked to the front of the class, clutching my note cards. 2 weeks had passed since Nathan's texts, and while he hadn't messaged again, the damage was done. I barely slept, jumped at every notification, and spent way too much time overthinking every interaction with James. "Mr. Hayes," I reminded myself for the 100th time. "Daisy Buchanan," I began, "represents the American dream gone wrong. She's beautiful, wealthy, and completely hollow inside. She lets others take the fall for her mistakes." The classroom door opened. Grace burst in, tears streaming down her face. "James." She choked out. "Nathan's in the hospital." The note card slipped from my hands. "What?" James was already moving. "What happened?" "Car accident. Mom says, she says it's bad." The room erupted in whispers. Through the chaos, my eyes met James's. For a moment, we weren't teacher and student, we were just two people sharing the same nightmare. "Mr. Patterson," James started. "Go," the older teacher nodded. "Take Grace." And he glanced at me, understanding in his eyes. "Ms. Bennett, you're excused too. The next few minutes were a blur. Somehow, we ended up in James's Jeep, the same one he'd taught me to drive in, now with a Colorado license plate. Grace was in the back seat, talking rapidly to their mother on the phone. Exit 47, she reported. They airlifted him to Denver Memorial. James's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. What happened? He was driving to the airport. Said he needed to come to Denver, that it was important. Then, black ice, they think. My blood ran cold. Denver. He was coming here. Because of me. Did he? James glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Did he say why? Something about making things right. Grace sniffled. He's been acting weird ever since he found out Olivia was here. Kept saying he had to explain about prom night. The word hung in the air like smoke. Prom night. The beginning of the end. Liv, James said softly. Maybe now's the time to tell us what really happened. I stared out the window, watching Denver's skyline grow closer. You wouldn't believe me. Try me. So I did. Nathan wasn't just cheating on me, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He was running a cheating ring. Selling test answers, writing papers for money. I caught him after he tried to hack into the school's grading system. Grace gasped. James's grip on the wheel tightened. He said if I told anyone, he'd frame you, James. Said he had evidence that you helped students cheat when you tutored at Riverside. Fake evidence, but enough to ruin your teaching career before it started. That's why you broke up with him at prom? Grace asked. Not because. Not because I had feelings for James. I laughed bitterly. That's what Nathan told everyone, right? That I was secretly in love with his brother, that I'd been stringing him along. Liv, James started. The worst part is, he wasn't entirely wrong. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I did have feelings for you, James. But I never acted on them. I would never do that to Nathan. But when I threatened to expose his cheating scheme, he turned everything around. Made it look like I was the one running the operation, like I'd seduced him to get access to test answers. That's why you left, James said quietly. Not just because of the rumors, but because the school board was investigating, and Nathan had set it up to make me look guilty. So yeah, I ran. Dad took the Denver job, and I disappeared. Blocked everyone's numbers, including yours, because I couldn't bear to see if you believed him over me. We pulled into the hospital parking lot, the emergency room lights casting strange shadows. Before we got out, James turned to face me fully. I never believed him, he said. That's what I've been trying to tell you. After you left, things started unraveling. Other students came forward about the cheating ring. Nathan confessed to some of it, but by then you were gone. I tried to find you, to tell you. Mr. Hayes. Grace's voice was small. They're waiting for us inside. Reality crashed back. Right. We were at a hospital. Nathan was hurt. And James was still my teacher. Go, I said. Your brother needs you. Liv. It's Ms. Bennett, remember? I tried to smile. I'll get an Uber home. Like hell you will. He was using his teacher voice now. You're part of this story too. And I think it's time we all heard the ending. As we walked into the hospital, Grace slipped her hand into mine. For what it's worth, she whispered, I always knew Nathan was lying. You looked at James like he hung the moon, but you never would have acted on it. You're too good for that. I squeezed her hand, fighting back tears. She was right about one thing. I had looked at James like he hung the moon. Still did, if I was being honest. But now, as we headed toward whatever scene awaited us in that hospital room, I couldn't help but wonder, in all the great literature we'd been studying, did any of the star-crossed lovers ever figure out how to make it work? I guess we were about to find out. Hospital fluorescent lights have a way of making everything look harsh and unforgiving. Including the truth. Nathan looked smaller somehow, lying in the hospital bed. His usually perfectly styled hair was messy, and a nasty cut ran along his left temple. When he saw us enter, his eyes widened first at James, then at Grace, and finally landing on me. Liv? His voice was hoarse. You actually came. Nathan, Mrs. Hayes stepped forward, her face stern despite her obvious relief. What were you thinking, driving in that weather? The doctors said you're lucky to be alive. I had to. He coughed, wincing. Had to fix things. Fix things. James's voice was controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath. Like how you tried to fix things at Riverside. By destroying Olivia's reputation. Nathan's face fell. You know. We all know, Grace spoke up. About the cheating ring, the lies, everything. The monitors beeped steadily in the silence that followed. I stayed near the door, ready to run if necessary. But then Nathan did something I never expected. He started crying. I'm sorry, he choked out. God, Liv, I'm so sorry. I was going to come clean, tell everyone the truth. That's why I was driving here. Why now? I found myself asking. It's been months. He looked at James. Because of him. He wouldn't let it go. Kept digging, kept pushing. Found more students who were involved. He was going to report everything to the school board next week. I turned to James in surprise. He'd been investigating all this time. You were ruining your life, James said quietly. And Olivia's. Someone had to stop it. I know. Nathan wiped his eyes. But it wasn't just about the cheating ring. I saw how you looked at each other, even back then. I was so jealous, so angry. I convinced myself that you two were secretly together. That's why I started spreading those rumors after prom. I started. I know that now, Nathan interrupted. James made that very clear when he found out what I'd done. Said he'd never betray me like that, even though. He looked between us. Even though anyone with eyes could see how you felt about each other. The room felt too small suddenly. James was staring at the floor, his hands in his pockets. Grace was pretending to be very interested in the hospital wall art. Mrs. Hayes looked like she was getting a headache. I have all the evidence, Nathan continued. Screenshots, emails, everything that proves you were innocent. I'll send it to Riverside, clear your name. I should have done it months ago. That's good, I managed. But my mind was stuck on his words about James and me. About feelings we'd never acknowledged, not even to ourselves. A nurse poked her head in. I'm sorry, but visiting hours are ending. Family only after 8 p.m. Go, Nathan said. I'll handle everything with Riverside tomorrow. And Liv? I paused at the door. I really am sorry. For everything. In the hospital parking lot, the evening air was crisp with early autumn. Mrs. Hayes insisted on driving Grace home, leaving James and me standing awkwardly by his Jeep. I should call an Uber, I said. Liv. Really, it's fine. It's been a long day and. I quit. I blinked. What? I submitted my resignation to Mr. Patterson this morning. Before all this happened. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm taking a position at East High instead. But, why? He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his familiar cologne. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't still have those feelings Nathan talked about. Because seeing you every day in class and having to act like we're strangers is killing me. Because. Mr. Hayes. A voice called across the parking lot. We jumped apart like guilty teenagers. It was Hannah, of all people, getting out of her mom's car. Is Nathan okay? Grace texted me what happened and she stopped, looking between us. Oh. Oh wow. Am I interrupting something? No, I said quickly. Yes, James said at the same time. Hannah's eyes widened. I knew it. I knew there was something going on. All those weird tension-filled moments in class, the way you two look at each other when you think no one's watching. Hannah, I groaned. Don't worry, she grinned. Your secret's safe with me. Besides, everyone's been betting on when Mr. Hayes would quit anyway. The chemistry between you two is way too obvious to be just teacher-student. There's no chemistry, I protested weakly. There's no anything. There can't be. Can't there? James asked softly. I'm not your teacher anymore, Liv. And Nathan's finally telling the truth. All those reasons we couldn't before, they're gone. Except one, I reminded him. You're still his brother. The weight of that truth hung between us. Hannah, bless her, seemed to realize she was witnessing something private. I'm just gonna go check on Nathan, she said, backing away. But for what it's worth. Sometimes the things that seem impossible are the ones most worth fighting for. As her footsteps faded, James touched my cheek gently. She's right, you know. And I'm done letting my brother's mistakes dictate our lives. The question is, are you? I looked up at him, at the face I'd tried so hard to forget, and felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to find out if some stories could have a different ending than the ones we studied in class. Your resignation, I said slowly. When does it take effect? He smiled that warm, genuine smile I'd fallen for years ago. Tomorrow's my last day. Then ask me again tomorrow night, I whispered. Ask me everything you couldn't before. His eyes lit up with understanding. Tomorrow, he agreed. No more hiding. No more pretending. As I finally let him drive me home, I thought about all the classic romances we'd been studying in class. How many of them were about timing, about waiting for the right moment, about fighting through complications to find something real. Maybe Hannah was right. Maybe some things were worth the wait. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be our right moment. You know those moments in books that change everything? The ones where the protagonist finally realizes all the pieces have been falling into place, even when they seem to be falling apart. Mine happened during James's last class. Today, he announced, we're discussing second chances in literature. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, especially not Hannah, who was practically vibrating with excitement beside me. Word had spread about Nathan's accident, his confession, and James's resignation. The rumor mill was working overtime, but for once, I didn't care. In The Great Gatsby, James continued, we see a man trying to recreate the past. But Fitzgerald tells us, you can't repeat the past. The question is, should we try? His eyes met mine across the classroom. In that moment, I understood what Fitzgerald got wrong. Sometimes the past doesn't need to be repeated, it just needs to be rewritten. The bell rang, signaling not just the end of class, but the end of an era. Students filed out, many stopping to say goodbye to James. I lingered, pretending to gather my books. Ms. Bennett? His voice was professional, but his eyes were smiling. A word about your essay? Hannah shot me a knowing wink as she left. Have fun discussing literature. When the room was empty, James closed the door. For a moment, we just looked at each other. So, I said. So, he echoed. I'm not your teacher anymore. No, you're not. He stepped closer. And Nathan's given his blessing. Actually insisted on it, between apologies and hospital jello. I laughed. Grace mentioned. She said he's turning into quite the matchmaker from his hospital bed. He's trying to make amends. Speaking of which. James pulled out his phone, showing me an email. Riverside just announced a formal investigation into the cheating scandal. Your name's been cleared. Relief flooded through me. Really? Really? You can stop running now, Liv. The way he said my name soft, like a secret, made my heart skip. I'm not running anymore. He touched my cheek, just like in the parking lot, but this time there was no one to interrupt. Good. Because there's something I've been wanting to do since you walked into this classroom 3 weeks ago. When he kissed me, it felt like every classic romance we'd studied coming to life. Like Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, Beatrice and Benedict, every pair of lovers who had to overcome obstacles to find their way to each other. But better, because it was real. Wait, I pulled back suddenly. We probably shouldn't do this here. He grinned. Probably not. Dinner tonight? Are you asking your former student on a date, Mr. Hayes? I'm asking the girl I've been in love with for the past year on a date, Ms. Bennett. The door burst open. Grace stood there, beaming. Finally. Oh, don't stop on my account. I just came to say Nathan's being released tomorrow, and he wants everyone to have dinner together. Like old times, but better. Better how? I asked. Because this time everyone's being honest. No more secrets, no more pretending. Just family. She paused. You are family, Liv. You always were. We just took a really complicated route to figure that out. Later that evening, at a small Italian restaurant downtown, I looked around the table at my unlikely family. Nathan, still bandaged but smiling genuinely for the first time in months. Grace, taking photos of everything for posterity. Hannah, who'd somehow talked her way into the family dinner. And James, holding my hand under the table like we were teenagers getting away with something. You know, Nathan said during dessert, I've been thinking about what you said in class today, James. About second chances. Oh. James raised an eyebrow. Maybe Gatsby had it wrong. Maybe instead of trying to repeat the past, we should focus on making the present better. He lifted his water glass. To new beginnings. We all raised our glasses. To new beginnings. And to finally figuring out the difference between what we want and what we think we should want, Grace added, looking meaningfully at James and me. Speaking of wants, Hannah chimed in, does this mean you two can finally stop pretending you're not madly in love? Because seriously, your Romeo and Juliet vibes were intense. Please, I laughed. We're more of a Pride and Prejudice couple. Less tragedy, more slow burn. With a dash of Midsummer Night's Dream chaos, James added, squeezing my hand. As long as it's not Wuthering Heights, Nathan joked. We've had enough drama. Looking around at these people who had somehow become my story's main characters, I realized something. Sometimes the best literature isn't found in books. Sometimes it's found in the messy, complicated, beautiful moments we create ourselves. As we left the restaurant, snow began to fall the first of the season. James pulled me close, and I remembered all those times in his classroom when we had to stay apart. You know what else Fitzgerald got wrong? I asked. What's that? That line about there are no second acts in American lives. Because this? I gestured between us, at our makeshift family heading into the snowy night. This feels like the perfect second act. He kissed me under the streetlight, snowflakes in his hair. No, Liv. This is just the beginning. And for once, the English teacher and the literature student agreed, some stories don't need tragic endings or dramatic twists. Sometimes, they just need time, truth, and the courage to write your own happy ending. Even if it takes a few drafts to get it right.